5 words. That's all it took to destroy a $40 million empire and turn one of America's most successful CEOs into the most hated woman on the internet overnight. When Karen Blackwell, a 52-year-old luxury event planning CEO who drove a Mercedes S-Class and wore Chanel suits like armor, stood in Judge Judy's courtroom and said with a dismissive laugh, "Rules don't apply to me," she had no idea those 5 words would be replayed 89 million times across every social media platform imaginable. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. She had no idea that Judge Judy had been setting a trap for weeks, gathering evidence that would expose her as something far worse than an arrogant executive. She had no idea that what happened in the next 3 minutes would trigger IRS investigations, criminal fraud charges, and the complete destruction of everything she had built through decades of exploitation and intimidation. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Karen didn't just lose her case. She didn't just get embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy did to her in those 3 minutes was so devastatingly brutal, so methodically calculated, that it became the most viral courtroom moment in daytime TV history, trending worldwide for 8 consecutive days with hashtags that turned Karen's arrogant statement into a symbol of everything wrong with corporate entitlement. We're talking about a woman who walked into that courtroom believing her wealth and status made her untouchable, only to discover that Judge Judy had already interviewed 31 of her previous victims and uncovered a pattern of systematic fraud that would send her to prison. The case appeared straightforward on the surface. Karen was being sued by Miguel Santos, a 34-year-old immigrant small business owner whose catering company she had destroyed after refusing to pay $85,000 for services perfectly rendered. But what the audience didn't know, what Karen herself didn't realize, was that this wasn't just about one unpaid invoice. This was about 31 similar cases spanning 7 years, about $2.3 million stolen from small vendors who couldn't afford to fight back, about a CEO who had built her entire business model on exploitation and intimidation. Judge Judy had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and she was about to make an example out of Karen Blackwell that would echo through business schools and courtrooms for generations. Before we show you the exact moment when this arrogant CEO said those 5 fatal words and triggered the most legendary takedown ever captured on camera, make sure you hit that like button if you believe that CEOs should face the same rules as everyone else and that wealth doesn't exempt anyone from basic human decency. Subscribe so you never miss these explosive courtroom moments where entitled bullies finally meet someone who won't tolerate their behavior. And trust me, what Judge Judy reveals about Karen's criminal business practices will shock you to your core. The evidence she had been hiding, the testimonies from victims, and the systematic pattern of fraud she uncovered will prove that this wasn't just bad business. It was organized theft disguised as corporate strategy. Picture this. Karen Blackwell strutting into Judge Judy's courtroom on a Tuesday morning in October, her blonde highlights fresh from a $400 salon appointment, her designer suit tailored to perfection, and her leather briefcase containing what she believed was ironclad evidence that would humiliate this television judge and the pathetic small business owner who dared to challenge her authority. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for this appearance, hiring an image consultant to perfect her on-camera presence, practicing her condescending explanations in front of her bathroom mirror, and telling her country club friends that she was going to school this TV judge on how real business works in the corporate world. She walked through those courtroom doors with the kind of confidence that only comes from decades of getting away with exploitation, from crushing people who couldn't fight back, from believing that rules were suggestions for ordinary people but didn't apply to someone of her status and success. What Karen didn't know was that across from her sat Miguel Santos, a man whose American dream she had nearly destroyed. Miguel, who had worked 3 jobs to save enough money to open his catering company. Miguel, whose wife and 2 young children depended on the business that Karen had systematically tried to obliterate. Miguel, who had delivered absolutely perfect service for Karen's company's annual gala, catering for 500 guests with food so exceptional that attendees were still talking about it months later. Miguel, who Karen refused to pay simply because she believed she could get away with it, because she had gotten away with it 31 times before, because in her twisted worldview, people like him existed to serve people like her and should be grateful for the opportunity even when she stole from them. Miguel Santos had never wanted to be in a courtroom. His entire life had been built on hard work, integrity, and the belief that if you did things the right way, treated people with respect, and delivered quality service, success would follow. He had come to America at 19 years old with $200 in his pocket and a dream that burned brighter than the Texas sun. For 15 years he had worked 3 jobs simultaneously, saving every possible dollar while learning the culinary arts at night school and building relationships with local vendors and suppliers. He had washed dishes in restaurants where he would eventually become a line cook, then a sous chef, and finally the head chef who trained others. His wife Maria had stood by him through all of it, working double shifts as a nurse while pregnant with their first child, believing in his vision of owning a catering company that would serve their community and provide a better life for their family. When Miguel finally opened Santos Catering 5 years ago, it represented everything beautiful about the American dream. He had poured his life savings of $47,000 into commercial kitchen equipment, a small delivery van, and the permits and licenses required to operate legally. He started small, catering birthday parties and local church events, building his reputation one perfectly prepared meal at a time. His food was exceptional because he treated every client like family, sourcing the freshest ingredients, preparing everything from scratch, and adding the kind of personal touches that made people remember not just the food but the care behind it. Word spread through the Houston community about this hard-working immigrant chef who delivered restaurant-quality catering at reasonable prices, and within 3 years, Santos Catering was generating $180,000 in annual revenue. Not enough to make Miguel rich, but enough to support his family with dignity, pay his workers fairly, and save for his children's education. That's when the opportunity of a lifetime appeared. Karen Blackwell's assistant contacted Miguel about catering the annual Blackwell Events Company Gala, a prestigious affair attended by 500 corporate executives, potential clients, and Houston's business elite. The contract was worth $85,000, nearly half of Miguel's annual revenue in a single event. More importantly, it represented the kind of exposure that could transform his small business into something much larger. Corporate clients who attended the gala could become regular customers. The networking opportunities were invaluable. Miguel saw this as the breakthrough moment that would allow him to hire additional staff, upgrade his equipment, and maybe even open a small restaurant. He spent 2 months preparing, researching every detail, creating custom menus, conducting multiple taste tests, and coordinating with Karen's team to ensure absolute perfection. The night of the gala, Miguel and his team of 6 delivered what he considered the finest work of his career. They arrived 3 hours early to set up, prepared everything according to the detailed specifications Karen had demanded, and served a 5-course meal that had guests stopping Miguel throughout the evening to complement the extraordinary quality. The seared salmon was cooked to perfection, the desserts were works of art, and the presentation exceeded even Karen's notoriously high standards. Miguel had documented everything with photographs, kept detailed time logs, and collected comment cards where guests raved about the exceptional food and service. He left that evening exhausted but thrilled, already imagining how this success would transform his business and provide security for his family. 2 weeks later, when Miguel submitted his invoice for the agreed-upon $85,000, Karen's response shattered his world. Her assistant sent a brief email stating that Blackwell Events would not be paying due to quality issues with the catering service. Miguel was stunned. Quality issues. He immediately called Karen's office, requesting specific details about what had been inadequate so he could understand and address any concerns. The assistant was vague and dismissive, mentioning that some guests had complained about temperature and presentation, though she couldn't provide any specific examples or documentation. Miguel offered to review the comment cards he had collected, the photographs proving perfect presentation, and the testimonials from guests who had specifically praised the food. The assistant said Karen would not be discussing this further and that Miguel should consider the matter closed. Miguel couldn't let it go. This wasn't just about money, though $85,000 represented months of revenue and would devastate his cash flow. This was about his reputation, his integrity, and the principle that honest work deserves honest payment. He had fulfilled every obligation, exceeded every expectation, and documented everything meticulously. He hired a lawyer who sent a formal demand letter outlining the breach of contract and requesting immediate payment. That's when Karen revealed her true nature. Instead of paying what she owed, she launched a systematic campaign to destroy Miguel's business completely. She contacted his other clients, warning them about alleged quality issues and suggesting they find other caterers. She posted negative reviews on every platform, claiming Santos Catering had ruined her important event. She sent her expensive attorneys after Miguel with cease and desist letters threatening defamation lawsuits if he continued to request payment or speak negatively about Blackwell Events. The legal language was deliberately intimidating, designed to crush someone operating on thin margins who couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle. Within 2 months, Miguel's business lost 60% of its revenue as Karen's whisper campaign poisoned his reputation throughout Houston's corporate catering market. Clients who had been loyal for years suddenly canceled contracts, citing vague concerns about reliability. New inquiries dried up completely. Miguel's wife Maria had to pick up extra nursing shifts while Miguel sold their second car and took out a second mortgage on their modest home just to keep the business afloat and feed their 2 children. The financial devastation was crushing, but the emotional toll was even worse. Miguel had never experienced such calculated cruelty in his life. He had served his country in the Marine Corps, faced danger overseas, and always believed that America was a place where hard work and integrity mattered more than wealth and status. Karen Blackwell was teaching him a different lesson, that people with money and power could destroy you simply because they felt like it, that justice was something you could only afford if you had resources to fight back. Miguel's 8-year-old daughter asked him why he looked so sad all the time. His 6-year-old son asked if they were going to lose their house. Maria held him at night while he questioned everything he had believed about fairness and opportunity. The worst part was the helplessness, watching everything he had built over 15 years crumble because one wealthy woman decided she didn't feel like paying her bills. What Miguel didn't know was that he wasn't Karen's first victim. He was number 32 in a pattern of systematic exploitation that Karen Blackwell had perfected over 7 years of running Blackwell events. Judge Judy's research team had uncovered the truth. Karen's entire business model was built on a simple but devastating formula. She would hire small vendors, freelancers, and service providers for her luxury events, demand exceptional quality and extensive documentation of every detail, then refuse payment after the work was completed. She would cite vague quality issues, make impossible demands for evidence of problems, and then unleash her legal team when vendors tried to collect what they were owed. Most vendors, operating on razor-thin margins and terrified of expensive litigation, would eventually give up and accept their losses. Karen had saved her company approximately $2.3 million over 7 years through this systematic theft, money that should have gone to hardworking small business owners but instead padded the profits of her already successful company. The pattern was chillingly consistent. Karen specifically targeted immigrant-owned businesses, single parents, and vendors who operated without the financial cushion to survive prolonged legal battles. She kept detailed files on her targets, noting their financial vulnerabilities, their likelihood of fighting back, and the most effective pressure points to make them surrender. Her assistant maintained a spreadsheet tracking unpaid vendors, the amounts owed, and the status of their collection attempts. Karen reviewed this spreadsheet monthly, celebrating each vendor who gave up as a victory in what she called smart business practices. She had faced complaints with the Better Business Bureau, but her lawyers always managed to get them dismissed or settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements that prevented victims from warning others. Karen's confidence as she prepared for Judge Judy was absolutely unshakable. She had faced 3 previous small claims court cases and won all of them by overwhelming plaintiffs with documentation, legal motions, and testimony from her staff who had been coached to support whatever narrative Karen created. She had studied Judge Judy's previous episodes, noting that the judge seemed to respect successful businesspeople and had little patience for disorganized plaintiffs who couldn't present clear evidence. Karen believed she had every advantage in this case. Her expensive suit, her polished presentation style, her folder full of fabricated incident reports and doctored photographs showing alleged food quality issues. She had even practiced her emotional testimony about how Miguel's poor service had embarrassed her company in front of important clients, though no such embarrassment had actually occurred. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy had been building a case against her for 3 weeks. One of Miguel's lawyers had contacted the show's producers with details about Karen's pattern of refusing payment, and that initial inquiry had triggered the most thorough background investigation in Judge Judy's history. The show's research team had tracked down 17 of Karen's previous victims, people who had signed non-disclosure agreements but were willing to speak confidentially to investigators. They had obtained copies of Karen's internal spreadsheets through a former employee who had quit in disgust after witnessing the systematic exploitation. They had documented the pattern of fake negative reviews, the threatening legal letters, and the whisper campaigns that destroyed reputations. Judge Judy had personally reviewed every piece of evidence, and what she found had infuriated her beyond anything she had experienced in 35 years of jurisprudence. The Judge Judy courtroom buzzed with its usual electric energy as cameras rolled and millions of Americans tuned in expecting another routine small claims case. The audience had settled into their seats, production assistants made final checks, and Judge Judy reviewed her notes one last time with the slight smile that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to learn a very hard lesson. Karen Blackwell entered the courtroom like she was walking into a boardroom she owned, her designer heels clicking confidently against the floor, her perfectly styled hair catching the studio lights, and her expression radiating the kind of superiority that comes from decades of crushing people without consequence. Across from her, Miguel Santos sat quietly in a simple suit he had borrowed from his brother-in-law, clutching a folder of documentation with hands that trembled slightly from the anxiety of facing the woman who had nearly destroyed his life. Judge Judy opened the case with her signature no-nonsense approach, asking Miguel to explain why he was suing Karen Blackwell for $205,000. Miguel spoke with quiet dignity, describing the gala he had catered, the exceptional service his team had provided, and the systematic destruction of his business that followed when Karen refused to pay. He presented his evidence methodically, the signed contract clearly stating the $85,000 fee, photographs from the event showing perfect food presentation, comment cards where guests praised the exceptional quality, and text messages from Karen's assistant confirming that everything had gone smoothly. He showed bank statements proving his business had lost $120,000 in revenue after Karen's campaign of negative reviews and calls to his other clients. His voice broke slightly when he described nearly losing his home and watching his children ask why Daddy was so sad all the time. Judge Judy listened intently, asking clarifying questions and examining each piece of documentation with the thoroughness that had made her legendary. Then she turned her attention to Karen, and the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees. Karen's opening statement was a masterclass in condescension and entitlement. She described Miguel as just another vendor who had failed to meet her company's high standards, claimed that numerous guests had complained about food temperature and presentation, and suggested that Miguel was playing the victim card to avoid accountability for his poor performance. She spoke about her company's sterling reputation, her relationships with Fortune 500 clients, and her responsibility to maintain excellence in everything she did. When Judge Judy asked for documentation of these alleged quality issues, Karen waved her hand dismissively and said that important executives like herself didn't have time to document every little problem with vendors who couldn't perform at the required level. Judge Judy's questions became increasingly pointed, asking Karen why not a single guest complaint had been documented if the problems were so severe. Karen's response dripped with arrogance as she explained that in the corporate world, people at her level operated on trust and reputation rather than paperwork. When Judge Judy pointed out that Miguel had a signed contract guaranteeing payment, Karen actually rolled her eyes and said that contracts were guidelines and that sophisticated business people understood that payment was contingent on satisfactory performance, which she alone had the expertise to determine. The audience murmured disapprovingly, but Karen seemed to interpret this as validation, believing that ordinary people simply couldn't understand how business worked at her elevated level. Then Judge Judy asked the question that would spring her trap. She leaned forward and asked Karen how many other vendors she had refused to pay over the years despite receiving their services. Karen paused, sensing potential danger but unable to resist the opportunity to demonstrate her power. She answered with disturbing casualness that she had disputed payment with dozens of vendors over her career, claiming it was simply part of maintaining quality standards in a competitive industry. When Judge Judy pressed for a specific number, Karen shrugged and said perhaps 20 or 30 vendors had failed to meet her expectations over the past 7 years. The courtroom went silent as the implication hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had just been fired. Judge Judy's next question was delivered with surgical precision. So you're telling me that 30 different vendors, all of whom ran successful businesses before working with you, suddenly became incompetent when they worked for Blackwell Events? Karen's face flushed with irritation at having her business practices questioned by someone she clearly viewed as beneath her status. She launched into a condescending explanation about how the luxury event industry required standards that ordinary people couldn't understand, how her Fortune 500 clients expected perfection, and how she couldn't waste time explaining basic business concepts to people who didn't operate at her level. Judge Judy interrupted her, asking directly whether Karen believed her wealth and success exempted her from honoring legally binding contracts. That's when Karen made the fatal mistake that would destroy everything she had built. She let out a dismissive laugh, looked directly at Judge Judy with undisguised contempt, and said the 5 words that would be replayed 89 million times. "Rules don't apply to me." The silence that followed those 5 words was deafening. 3 seconds passed that felt like an eternity as every person in that courtroom processed what Karen Blackwell had just said on national television. "Rules don't apply to me." Karen's face showed the first flicker of uncertainty as she realized something had fundamentally shifted in the room, but her arrogance wouldn't let her backtrack. She tried to clarify, stammering that she meant people at her level operated differently, But Judge Judy raised her hand with such authority that Karen's voice died in her throat. "Stop. Just stop right there," Judge Judy commanded, her voice cold and precise. The predator had finally decided to strike, and Karen was about to discover exactly how thoroughly she had been trapped. Judge Judy reached for the thick manila folder that had been sitting ominously on her desk throughout the entire hearing. "Ms. Blackwell, you just told this courtroom and 12 million viewers that rules don't apply to you. Let's explore that philosophy." She opened the folder with deliberate slowness, pulling out document after document while Karen's face drained of color. "I've spent 3 weeks investigating your business practices, and what I found is absolutely disgusting. You didn't just refuse to pay Mr. Santos. Over the past 7 years, you have systematically defrauded 31 small business owners out of a combined total of $2.3 million. Judge Judy's voice rose with righteous fury as she detailed Karen's pattern of exploitation, how she specifically targeted immigrant-owned businesses and single parents who couldn't afford legal battles, how she maintained spreadsheets tracking her victims and celebrating each one who gave up trying to collect payment. The courtroom erupted in gasps as Judge Judy revealed internal emails where Karen bragged to her staff about playing the system and crushing the little people. She presented testimony from Karen's former employee who had quit in disgust after witnessing the systematic fraud. She showed bank records proving that Karen had claimed tax deductions for bad debts on vendors who had actually delivered perfect service, which meant Karen hadn't just stolen from small businesses but had committed tax fraud against the federal government. Each revelation hit Karen like a physical blow, her trademark confidence crumbling in real time as cameras captured every moment of her psychological collapse. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, unable to form words as her carefully constructed empire disintegrated before her eyes. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She leaned forward with lethal intensity and addressed Karen directly. "You said rules don't apply to you, Ms. Blackwell. Let me tell you what does apply to you. Contract law applies to you. Fraud statutes apply to you. Tax regulations apply to you. And my judgment, which you are about to receive, definitely applies to you." The verdict was swift and devastating. Judge Judy ordered Karen to pay Miguel the full $85,000 owed, plus $120,000 in damages for lost business, plus $50,000 in punitive damages for the emotional distress caused by her predatory practices. Total judgment, $255,000. But the financial penalty was just the beginning. Judge Judy announced she was forwarding the case to the IRS for investigation of tax fraud, to the Texas Attorney General for systematic vendor fraud, and to the Better Business Bureau to alert them about the pattern of deception that had been hidden behind non-disclosure agreements. Karen's complete meltdown was instant and spectacular. The powerful CEO who had strutted into the courtroom like royalty was now sobbing uncontrollably, her designer makeup running in dark streaks down her face, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold onto her briefcase. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking with desperation. "This will ruin me. You don't understand what this will do to my company, my reputation, everything I've built." Judge Judy's response was ice cold. "You should have thought about that before you said rules don't apply to you. You built your empire by stealing from people who couldn't fight back. Now you get to face the consequences." Karen stumbled out of the courtroom, completely destroyed, while Miguel Santos stood quietly with tears of relief streaming down his face, finally vindicated after 2 years of suffering. Within 72 hours, the clip had exploded across every social media platform, shared 89 million times with the hashtag #RulesApplyToEveryone trending worldwide for 8 consecutive days. Karen became the face of corporate entitlement, her 5 words turned into memes and cautionary tales across the internet. The real-world consequences were swift and merciless. 23 of Karen's corporate clients canceled contracts within 48 hours. Her board of directors forced her resignation. The IRS investigation resulted in $380,000 in back taxes and penalties. Criminal fraud charges were filed, and Karen eventually served 18 months in federal prison. Her mansion was foreclosed, her luxury cars repossessed, and Blackwell Events filed for bankruptcy within 6 months. Meanwhile, Miguel's business flourished as the story went viral, with new clients flooding in to support the hardworking immigrant who had stood up to corporate bullying. If you believe Judge Judy delivered the justice this arrogant CEO desperately needed, smash that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more moments where entitlement meets accountability. Comment "Rules apply to everyone" if you think every corrupt executive should watch this as a warning. Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when you think you're above the law. Remember, in Judge Judy's courtroom and in life, rules apply to everyone, and no amount of wealth or status exempts you from basic human decency and the consequences of your actions.